and we are filming. So it's nice to meet you, Tiani. This is Tiani from New Hampshire Ranked Choice Voting.
Right.
So how long, first of all, has this been a thing in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Ranked Choice Voting organization?
So we've become an official organization like in 2020.
Okay.
But we're kind of an unofficial, loose Facebook group starting at the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018.
Okay. So recent presence then.
Yes, yes.
Would you say that ranked choice voting has had a rise in attention recently that maybe brought about this organization?
Absolutely. I've been a supporter of ranked choice voting since very early on, like in around 2001 is when I first became familiar with it and started supporting it around 2003, 2004, because we used it in our conventions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been picking up steam. I think with Maine passing ranked choice voting, then it seemed to be something that more people could start to grasp and understand. Before it was kind of just the wonks supported it, the people who were a little bit of geeks and nerds on the election front.
Just
But
a
now,
collection of math nerds and libertarians, probably.
But now a lot more people are supporting it, and we've been able to, get out and talk to the grassroots and get a lot of people signing up in support. So
Absolutely. So I want to ask you more about Maine, but before I do, let's get an explanation of ranked choice voting. I've
Sure.
made up a little graph here that I hope is helpful. I might not have a perfect understanding of RCV, but so what I've done here is I've taken some lines representing various major political parties. I've got Republican Party, Democratic Party, and then because I wanted to have it be sort of realistic, I did Libertarians, Greens, and Unity in the middle there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have pre-RCV, here's how the vote typically looks. Democrats and Republicans get the most significant portion, and the other maybe smaller third parties don't get as much of a portion. This right here is just showing the process of the votes transferring from the third party organizations. So I'm showing probably a lot of the Green Party votes going to the Democrats, probably, maybe not necessarily, a lot of the Libertarian votes going to the Republicans, and the Unity votes maybe kind of going to both. Might not be perfectly accurate, but probably a broad process of the transference. And here's the post RCV where they've aligned here, because if my understanding is correct, what RCV is seen as being for, at least by a lot of these third-party organizations, is it allows third parties to participate without having to worry as much about the spoiler effect, because if they participate, the votes can still be transferred to the leading candidate, the Democrat or the Republican. Is that, do you feel like this is a good graph? Is this a good explanation?
To some degree, I think so. Ranked choice voting, one thing that it does really well is our current system works really well if you just have two candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And having the duopoly of the two major parties kind of, part of the reason why we have a duopoly is because it kind of creates that you just have two real candidates that matter and you just have two candidates.
Right.
But the truth is that most people aren't really satisfied with just the two parties, and they want there to be healthier, more voices in the mix in our democracy and more healthy competition. And so ranked choice voting allows for there to be more than two candidates. If you have three candidates or more, ranked choice voting is really a system that works best. So like you said, if you have a lot of different candidates like this. So I think it does two things. I mean, like you said, ranked choice voting definitely deals with the fact that when you have more than two candidates, you're going to have vote splitting, you're going to have spoiler effects, you're going to have these problems. Ranked choice voting takes care of that, so you don't have that problem. But another thing that it does, though, as well, is that it allows, which is sort of a similar thing, but it allows other people to operate on a more level playing field. And so if they're a strong candidate, it actually, gives them a more level playing field to compete in a better atmosphere so that they could do better. If they're not a very strong candidate, then they're still not going to do very well, but at least they're not a spoiler, right?
Absolutely.
But if they're a strong candidate, it actually gives them more of a chance to play on a level playing field. So if you want me to explain that better, I can explain it in more detail.
So one thing I did want to get at is because it's not on this graph, the process of how this works. I believe it's called like single transferable vote is usually what I see advocated, and that's where you would on the ballot, like physically, you would write in your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. And if your first choice doesn't get enough votes, then the votes transfer to your second choice, and so on. Is that accurate most of the time?
Well, usually if you're operating in a single winner district where you're just voting for one winner, then they don't usually call it a single transferable vote. They more often call it like instant runoff voting.
Instant runoff.
And a single transferable vote is usually a term used when you have a multi-member district where you are voting for 3 winners or 4 winners or more.
Okay. And that's just the terminology.
That's just the terminology, but how it works, let's start with a single winner, which is the kind of election we're most familiar with, where you're just voting for one person to win. In those races, so what happens, like you said, everyone ranks their candidates. So if there's more than 2 candidates, they can rank first choice, second choice, third choice, and so forth. And then what happens is, it works just like any election that we know to start with. They count everyone's first choice vote, which would be just like how we vote now. And if someone gets more than 50%, they're the winner, and you don't have to do anything else.
Okay.
But if nobody gets more than 50% of the vote, then what happens is it works like a runoff election, except it's called an instant runoff because it's all done on one ballot, because everyone's already voted how they would vote in a runoff by ranking the candidates.
Oh, that's where the term, I was always wondering where the term instant runoff came from in these conversations.
Right. So if no one gets more than 50% after you've counted everyone's first choice, then it works like a runoff, and what happens is whoever got last place of the first choice votes, they are eliminated, and then you count everyone's highest preference. So if you voted for the person who got last place, now your second choice is being counted because your first choice has been eliminated, they took last. But everyone who voted for someone who's still in the running, they're still counting their first choice because they're still in the race, right? They made it to the runoff.
Exactly.
And you do that until somebody gets more than 50% of the vote.
So I suppose
or until all the ballots are exhausted.
If I wanted to make this really accurate, I probably could have drawn a little 50% line here, because this is the final stage of the election.
Right, right.
So you said it was implemented up in Maine. Was that fairly recently that passed in Maine, and was that on the like a governorial level that happened?
Yes. I think it passed in Maine for the first time in 2016, but they went through a lot of process. They never used it. They used it in 2018 for the first time.
All right.
And they've been using it ever since. And at first they were not using it in their presidential elections. Now they are using it in their presidential elections. They're using it in their primaries and in their general elections. They are not yet using it for some of their state office elections. They're using it for Congress, U.S. Senate, and state reps for general elections, and the president for the general election, and for all other offices in the primary election. But they're not using it in the general election for governor and.
Got it. That's an interesting choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge. I mean, they're going presidential level, and you said in the primaries as well.
Right. Even in their presidential primary.
Does that function similarly in the primaries? Is there any added steps to implementing ranked choice voting for a primary?
For regular primary elections, it's just exactly the same. For the presidential primary election, it's a little bit different, because in presidential primaries, we are actually allocating delegates, and it's allocated proportionally. So they're not looking for someone to get, they're not looking for one candidate, because if some candidates cross the threshold, they'll still get delegates. And so so in a presidential primary, they run the rounds until nobody is below the threshold. So otherwise what happens is, for example, for the presidential primary, whoever can get more than 10% on the Republican side or more than 15% on the Democratic side can get a delegate. And so get some delegates, right? And of course the winner gets the most delegates. And so what happens is, if you've got a lot of candidates who got below the 10% or the 15%, all of those votes are essentially wasted in a presidential primary. Everyone who voted for them, their votes are not going towards any delegates.
Okay.
I mean, technically the winner of all of it, I guess, gets all the delegates, but the people didn't vote for them.
Okay.
And so by doing ranked choice voting, your vote is going towards somebody who's over the threshold, and so your vote is going towards some delegates.
It's not being completely wasted.
Right.
So I want to also address maybe a couple of criticisms I've heard. These are pretty broad criticisms, but just when talking to people. Ironically, the two criticisms I've heard the most. One was from a far left individual who said ranked choice voting is biased towards the center, and he didn't like that because he's trying to push things to the left. And then another person I talked to said that ranked choice voting, like, tempers extremism, and that if we want more moderate candidates and more sort of center candidates, we don't want ranked choice voting. So I've kind of heard both. I've heard it creates extremism and it creates centrism. Does it do either of those things, do you think?
Well, so what ranked choice voting does is it helps make sure that whoever wins the election is the person who has the most support, right? Typically more than 50% of the vote. So it really depends on where the majority of the voters are.
Yeah.
If the majority of the voters are, conservative, then it'll be conservative. If the majority of the voters are liberal, it will be liberal. If the majority of voters are kind of more in the center and moderate, it will be moderate. It's not about being, it's nonpartisan. It's not about, it's not about trying to help people who are liberal or trying to help people who are conservative or trying to help people who are moderate or any other iteration of that. It's about trying to make sure that the winner is the person who 50% or more of the voters want. Because right now, like I said, if you have more than two candidates, then sometimes you're going to have winners who could win with 47% or even 30% or 20%. If you have a lot of candidates, they might only have 20%.
Right.
And then that person who's winning may not really represent the most people. They just represent a little block. And maybe that would make you happy if it's your block, but if it's not your block, it's not going to make you happy at all.
Exactly.
And so it's better to get the winner who is the person who the most voters really support.
That's great. And I've been drawn to ranked choice voting because of the type of political actors I've been being drawn to in politics. The people I've found most interesting at the same time were non-traditional people on the right, people who are farther to the left than the Democrats on the left. I found libertarians to have an insightful voice at times, and then I've also found the emerging like centrism with a spine to be an interesting group as well. The No Labels Party, the Forward Party, and the what was the last one there? Well, I got it listed actually. The Unity Party.
Oh yeah.
Yes. All three of those organizations are very similar in that they tend to advocate for open primaries and ranked choice voting.
And don't forget independence.
Independence. Yes, I mean really that's the base of all of these people.
Right.
Because all of these people are probably, regardless of what they believe, registering as independents. And in New Hampshire, that's most people.
Right. And one thing that's really good about ranked choice voting is that what it does is it allows people to vote their conscience.
Yeah.
And so if you really like one of these candidates and one of these other groups that maybe are not as well known or maybe don't have as much support, but you really like them, you can vote for them and not be afraid that you're going to actually end up helping to elect the person you hate, right? You can say, I like so and so, whether it be so and so who's with No Labels or so and so who's with Forward or so and so who's with the Green or with Independent or whatever. If you like them, you can vote for them and not be afraid that you're helping to elect the person you hate. And so that will actually probably help them get more votes. It may not help them win because they may still not be in the majority, but it would help them at least get more votes because a lot of times people are just afraid to vote for them. They're like, I like them, but I don't dare. Or they could never win, so I can't vote for them. Whereas now it's like, oh, well, if you like them, vote for them. You don't have to worry about that.
Exactly.
If they don't have enough support and they get dropped out, then you still get your second choice to choose between the other ones. But, that's good because that can really show how much support they actually have. And then people will have to pay more attention to them, even if they don't win.
Right.
They'll still have to pay more attention to them because it will
the
actually...
movement candidate, I call it. The person who runs not necessarily to win. Or maybe they ran to win, but they didn't.
Right.
But they get an idea out there, they draw attention, because I've seen a lot of success recently with unusual political campaigns on the national level, just drawing attention to issues no one's ever heard of before.
Right. So, it's good. I'll often say that ranked choice voting is a win-win for everyone, because, it's good for these underdogs, these movement candidates, these up-and-comers, whatever you want to call them. It's good for them, like I just explained, but it's also good for the major parties in the sense that these people aren't going to be spoilers either.
Right.
So, it allows us to have healthy competition. Right now what's happening is the major parties are saying, oh, you can't run. You shouldn't be running. Don't
get mad at
pretty
you
much,
if you run
exactly
outside of them, because they're like, you're gonna blow this election for
right
us.
right and so it's like, no, let people run, have healthy competition, have all the voices in the election, let there be a good election with everyone, and then you don't have to worry that they're going to spoil it. If the voters want them, then great, they'll do great. If the voters don't want them, they're not going to spoil the election. So let the voters decide.
Exactly. I have an idea I've been working towards recently. So I've been having guests on from various parties. I have coming this weekend a member of the Green Party, and like in about 2 weeks, look out for it. I have members of the Libertarian Party coming on to talk to me. I've already done the Pirate Party. I've got the American Solidarity Party. There's a lot of these different third-party organizations if you start looking for them. And I had an idea, and I wanted to run it by someone who isn't insane, because I'm a little bit insane. I want to get all of these people, if I can, from New Hampshire, like one of each of them, in one place, and advocating for themselves and for ranked choice voting. Because I know a lot of them, like if you go to Pride, for example, you'll see the Libertarian Party, you'll see the Pirate Party, the Green Party, they each have a table. I want to try and go up to those different groups and talk to them and say, why don't we get one big table? And we all sit across from each other in one big group, and we all have our little pamphlets of what each of our parties represent. We have people come up in a line, take one of each, and then also above it all it says, we all agree on ranked choice voting. I think that would maybe be a huge message to send to people in favor of this kind of a policy.
I think that would be awesome. I really do, and sometimes it might take talking to them about it, because I know that, for example, I think it was in 2016 where both Gary Johnson and Jill Stein supported ranked choice voting,
Right.
but unfortunately we didn't get to have it in that election, and in both cases they sometimes were, if you want to call it spoilers, where their vote percentage was higher than the percentage of difference between the two major candidates. But they supported ranked choice voting, and it would have been better if we had it. So I know a lot of these groups, I think if you talk to them, they do support ranked choice voting, but there are some who don't yet. They don't either don't understand it well or don't really understand. For example, I know the National Libertarian Party has used it in their conventions before, and they have, I think, even come out officially and supported it. But I know that some of the local libertarians in New Hampshire, whether they be big L or little L, some of them say, well, I support approval voting but not ranked choice voting. And I think we need to talk to them more about it, because in my opinion, in my view, ranked choice voting has the benefits of approval without the downsides, because
So tell me about that. What is approval voting and how does it compare?
So approval voting is a kind of voting system where you go and they say vote for everyone you approve of. So if there's a candidate you hate and don't approve of, you don't vote for them. But if you like 2 or 3 of them, you can vote for them all.
Got it.
But in my opinion, the negative of that is that you cannot distinguish between the one you like better than the other. You just vote for them all, so they all have an equal vote from you if you approve of them. Which means that a lot of people, if you have a favorite candidate, you're going to game the system. You're going to say, I like this one better, so I'm not going to approve of this one, even if you technically do. You're not going to, because you don't want to help them if you're trying to help this one more. So you're just going to vote block. You're just going to vote for one.
It doesn't eliminate strategic voting.
Exactly.
In the way ranked choice voting does.
Exactly. It doesn't eliminate strategic voting. Whereas with ranked choice voting, you're still saying everyone you approve of, basically, because whoever you vote for last, you don't approve of, right? And whoever you rank first, second, third, you're saying I approve of this one the most, this one the next most, this one the next most, but you're able to say who you like best versus, you know, and
It's
so I
more
think it's
depthful because it
Yeah.
gives you preferences.
right. So I think it's, you know, has the positives without the negatives.
So since we have some time left, I'll tell you a little bit about my long-term goals. The podcast is called Liquid New Hampshire,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in the short term, I support ranked choice voting as my cause. But in the long term, I want to move towards other sort of electoral system reforms,
Mm-hmm.
bigger system changes. And some of the two that I've been trying to push forward that I feel almost no one's heard of are liquid democracy
Mm-hmm.
and quadratic voting. Have you ever heard of either of these?
Um, I don't know. I don't know if quadratic voting is more like star voting or something else.
Okay.
No, tell me more about it. I don't know about those
I'll
two.
start with liquid democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Liquid democracy is an attempt to sort of soften direct democracy. So in direct democracy, obviously, you would vote on every single issue directly by popular vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Liquid democracy allows people through a digital platform. It would be on your phone, it would be on your laptop. It allows you to vote directly on issues that you want to, or to delegate your vote to someone else that you trust, and it will automatically delegate if you're not voting directly. So you can be represented most of the time if you don't want to pay too much attention, but if there's a specific issue where you disagree with the people you typically delegate to, you can say, I want to vote on that issue directly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think similarly to ranked choice voting, it allows a depth of political preference because it allows you to be an individual when you want to be and have an individual voice in politics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then quadratic voting is similar to what we just said about the preferences,
Mm-hmm.
right? Being able to say I have a preferred candidate here, here, and here. Quadratic voting is maybe the last thing I would want to change. This is one where maybe I want to start with like, let's get some businesses using this in their corporate boards. Let's talk to local town governments, see if they want to give it a trial period and see how it works. And we scale up from there because I don't want to do too much all at once, right?
Mm-hmm.
But quadratic voting uses a credit system. And the credit system, basically, you can not vote on issues that you don't care very much about, and then save up your credits and vote multiple times on issues that you do. The reason it's called quadratic is because they soften the preferences slightly by making it like the square root of whatever number of credits. So for example, you could vote if there's 3 issues: abortion, gun control, and taxes, let's say, right? You could not vote, you could vote once for abortion, once for gun control, and once for taxes, right? Or you could save it up, and then you would have, if you have 2 credits, you could vote twice. If you have, I think it's, well, what's the math on this?
3.
Sorry, the math is you need to have 4 credits to vote twice. You need to have 9 credits to vote 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it operates, right? So once is once, 4 is twice, 9 is 3 times, and so on. So that's just a way of softening it, but the basic idea is it allows you to express a depth of preference for what issues you care about the most.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the long-term goal that I see ranked choice voting as a big step in the direction of.
Well, I know that I participated not participated, but I kind of worked on a project that didn't go as far as I was hoping, but it was working towards a website that would do like what you're saying.
Okay.
It wasn't going to be official. It wasn't like a way of officially voting, like it wasn't official, right? But it was a way for citizens to engage so they could vote on the issues kind of the way you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not the quadratic, I had never heard of that, but more
Okay.
like
More like the liquid
liquid where
democracy?
you could, you know, where you could make your voice heard on the different issues.
Mm.
But it was just a way of making your voice heard, right? It wasn't like the official vote, but it was a way of making your voice heard. And I think it is good for, at least for candidates, to know how their constituents feel about the issues.
Right.
And I also know though that when we go vote in our town elections, sometimes I think it's like right? Because we have direct democracy in our towns. Maybe you don't.
Oh yeah, no, we
But
do.
in my
We
town,
have
and it's like
an initiative system
sometimes
here.
I'm like, why are we voting on every little line
Yeah.
item of the budget? You know, like whether we're going to buy a bus or whether we're going to. I'm just like,
No, I
you know,
agree.
it's a little too much, right?
And I I try to have that sort of nuanced view of there are some areas where I feel we could actually be less directly democratic. One thing I read, one person was talking about like approval process. I think it was for an infrastructure of some kind at every stage of the infrastructure. So there, at every stage of approval, there's town commentary, right? And so it's not even direct democracy, it's direct democracy 5 times. You know, it's you have to get you have to get the majority approval of whoever happens to show up 5 times or it gets cut. That in that instance I feel like you've moved past accountability and into bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think there's nuance when it comes to direct democracy and when it comes to liquid democracy. I think one of the benefits is it's not pure direct democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It does allow that representation in some areas.
Mm-hmm. I also support some things that are a little more systemic,
Mm.
and this is maybe I shouldn't be speaking. I'm not speaking right now in my role as president of New Hampshire Independent Voters. I mean, president of New Hampshire Ranked Choice Voting,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm speaking in my role as an independent with independent voters,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the nonpartisan primaries. I think that would be very helpful.
Open primaries?
Yeah, some people call it open primaries. It's technically not open primary because an open primary just means that you have a Democratic primary and a Republican primary and anyone can vote in that, but you still have to choose a primary.
Right.
But some people do call it open primaries, but it's technically a nonpartisan primary, just meaning that all candidates and all voters are in the same primary. Right?
I agree.
And I think that's a good thing because it will reduce the partisanship and the polarization and once again allow everyone to operate on a level playing field. But one thing that I like about ranked choice voting, or one thing that is good about ranked choice voting in trying to move it forward and trying to get it passed as a reform, is that it's really not that different. It's really not that different from what we already do.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you talk about it in terms of like an instant runoff voting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of places already hold runoff elections, and it's really just saying, this is like a runoff, but instead of having to come back for a whole second election, you can just do it right now on this ballot. And, you know, counting the votes, everything is just like we do now, just like you would do in a runoff. You know, so it's very similar, and so it's not changing things entirely.
Right.
So it's something that's used in a lot of places. Like, yes, Maine passed it, but we also use it. They also use it now in the general elections in Alaska, and
Hawaii at one point, maybe.
Well, I don't know for sure about Hawaii, but I do. Well, yes, I think Hawaii was one of the places that used it in the presidential primary of 2020.
Okay.
I believe. I know that they use it in lots of cities, over 50 cities in the country. Some of them very big cities,
Right.
such as New York City, San Francisco, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Portland.
It's simultaneously a big change and something a lot of people are already doing that they might not even think about or know much about that they're doing it.
Right. It's been used in a lot of places, so it's been tested.
Right.
So we know that it works. It's not like just an experiment, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's something that's not so hard to implement because it's been used in a lot of places. It's been tested, and it's very similar to what we already do. It's not very different. So
I do want to say, since you mentioned open primaries slightly earlier, one thing about open primaries that's maybe sort of New Hampshire specific is I know when I first started getting involved in politics, I wanted to register as an independent because I didn't see myself as a part of either party, and I was like, I want to be an independent. And then every single time that I go to vote, I have to switch registration into one party or the other in order to vote in the primaries, in order to vote in the general, and then I had to go and switch back to being an independent afterwards, seemingly just for the sake of my ego.
Well, right, and the thing is that now the latest Gallup poll shows that 51% of voters nationwide are independents.
I mean, after that debate,
And so it's like,
be?
so if you have, right, so you have so many independent voters, it's the majority now of the country, and yet we operate with all of the power and control going to the two major parties, even though the majority don't belong to them.
Yeah.
And so it seems to make a lot of sense to have a more level playing field for everyone. I mean, independent voters are treated so differently than the other voters. So
when I talk to Democrats, they talk about minority rule, and they're mostly referring to Republicans, but it's also, having Democrats and Republicans in charge, if what you're saying is true, is minority rule, right? Because they're the minority at this point.
Right.
Well, I think that's about all the questions I have for you today, actually.
Great.
It was nice to have you on.
It was good to be here. Thank you.
And I hope to, actually I should say, I hope to come out to an event at some point. I don't know if you guys ever do tabling or going door to door for ranked choice voting.
We do. Yep, we do. We have we call it clipboarding, and we often clipboard at the polls.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be on September 10th. We'll be at some of not all the polls. I wish we could man every poll in the state, but we don't.
Okay.
But some of the polls will be there, and we also go to some of the bigger events that are going on, especially events where we think politically minded people will be there, and we go clipboard at those events as well. And we also table sometimes at conventions and other forums and events.
Well, feel free to invite me. I will show out and I'll clipboard. I think I know what I'm doing September 10th.
Yeah, you can go to nhrankedchoice.org.
Okay.
And you can sign up to get on our mailing list and things like that. Our email list.
Is that the best place to reach you? Is nhrankedchoice.org?
NHranked, NHRANKEDCHOICE.org. Ranked choice.
Okay. You're also on Facebook. I know that. I saw you on Facebook.
Yes.
So for anybody
yes,
who wants to find them through there, very accessible to find you guys.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. This was a great interview. Nice to meet you.
You too. Thank you so much.